I tested 5 Byredo Black Saffron clones and alternatives to find out which one actually gets closest to that famous raspberry leather DNA. Today we are comparing by Saffron by Maison Alhambra, Killer Oud Nights of Arabia from Paris Corner, Vibrant Sensual Saffron by Paris Corner, Saffron Noir by Milestone, and Black Saffron by Armaf. And this comparison got interesting fast. One of these follows the Byredo structure almost perfectly, one has the best bottle and presentation for the money, and one is sharper, muskier, and more masculine, and one has the name Black Saffron. But when you look at the official notes, it has almost none of the same structure as the Byredo original. So today I'm ranking these by accuracy, opening quality, dry down, performance, presentation, and value. By the end of this video, you will know which one is the closest clone, which one performs the best, which one gives you the best presentation, and which one I would actually buy first. But before we get into clones, let's quickly remind ourselves why Black Saffron by Byredo is so difficult to copy. Byredo Black Saffron is built around contrast. It opens with bright pomelo, crisp juniper berries, and saffron. Then it moves into the dark smooth leather accord with black violet and crystal rose, and in the base you get raspberry, blonde woods, and vetiver. This is what makes it special. It's fruity, leathery, woody, slightly sweet, slightly dark, and somehow still clean and transparent. A lot of clones can copy the rough idea. They can give you saffron, leather, raspberry, and woods, but very few can capture that expensive, airy Scandinavian texture that Byredo does so well. On my skin, the original gives me around 7 to 8 hours of longevity. Projection is moderate for the first couple of hours. Then it settles into a refined, personal scent trail. It's not a loud beast mode fragrance, it's magnetic, and this is the standard these clones have to compete with. Now, let's start with the one that might be the closest architectural clone on this list, Maison Alhambra by Safron. Maison Alhambra is famous, or maybe infamous, for their visual presentations, and this bottle is clearly inspired by Byredo. You get the short, cylindrical bottle, the minimalist white label and black text, and that black dome style cap. It's not identical, and it feels a little more budget when you handle it, but visually, the inspiration is obvious. Now, here is where things get interesting. By Saffron follows the same basic structure very closely. Citrus, saffron, leather, violet, raspberry, vetiver, and woods. But please note, Byredo lists crystal rose and blonde woods, while Maison Alhambra lists rose and transparent woods. So this is not literally one-to-one official note pyramid, but structurally, it's one of the closest alternatives in this video. So how close does it actually smell? To my nose, this sits around 90% similar to Byredo in the air, especially once it settles. The opening is a little harsher than the original. This is where you can tell you are smelling a budget fragrance. The citrus and saffron do not feel quite as polished, and the blend does not have the same smooth lift that Byredo gives you right away. But after the opening comes down, this one is surprisingly close. The biggest difference is texture. The Byredo feels airy, refined, and transparent. Maison Alhambra feels sweeter, denser, and a little heavier. It pushes that raspberry and leather more forward, so the fragrance comes across thicker and more direct. This is not necessarily a bad thing. If you wanted Byredo Black Saffron to be a little sweeter, a little heavier, and a little more obvious, but by Safron actually gives you that. Performance is very solid for the price. On my skin, I get around 6 to 7 hours. Projection is strongest in the first 90 minutes. Then it settles into a sweet leathery scent bubble. This is a cold weather date night material. Fall, winter, cool evenings. That is where this DNA works best. If you want the closest overall clone for the lowest price, Maison Alhambra by Safron is probably the safest buy in this entire video. It's not as refined as Byredo, but for the money, it gets shockingly close. But accuracy is not everything, because this one may have the best presentation in the entire lineup. This is Paris Corner Killer Oud Nights of Arabia. Right away, Paris Corner flexes with the bottle. This does not look or feel like a cheap clone. You get a heavy red glass bottle, gold accent, substantial cap, and a presentation that punches way above the price point. If you care about how a fragrance looks on the shelf, this one immediately makes a strong impression. The atomizer is also a step up. It gives you a wider, more generous spray than some of the cheaper alternatives. Now let's talk about the scent. Night of Arabia opens with pomelo, juniper berry, and saffron. The heart gives you a leather, black violet, and a rose element. Then the base brings raspberry, vetiver, and cashmere. Now this is important. Unlike some other clones, this one keeps the pomelo and rose element, so the top and middle feel pretty faithful to the Byredo structure. But the big change is in the base. Instead of Byredo blonde woods, Paris Cornell uses cashmere, and cashmere changes the whole personality of the dry down. Byredo feels crisp, airy, and transparent. Night of Arabia feels warmer, muskier, denser, and more Middle Eastern in style. Because of that, I would put this around 85% close to Byredo in the air. It's not as transparent, it is not as delicate, but it has a rich, warm, slightly musky darkness that makes it very appealing. The opening can be a little rough for the first few minutes, so do not judge it immediately. Give it time. Once it settles, it becomes much smoother and more wearable. Performance is one of its biggest strengths. On skin, it gets around 6 to 8 hours. Projection is strong for the first couple of hours, and the central feels thicker than Byredo because of that cashmere base. On clothes, this can easily hang around for 8 to 10 hours. This is not a summer fresh. This is a jacket weather, night out energy, date night energy. Compared to Maison Alhambra, this one feels heavier, warmer, and a little more masculine. Maison Alhambra is closer to the original structure. Paris Corner gives you a more presentation and a bigger, muskier central. So here is the verdict. If you want the best presentation and a warmer, heavier take on a black saffron, Killer Oud Nights of Arabia is a very strong option. It may not be the most accurate clone, but it absolutely feels like you are getting your money worth. Now, here is where Paris Corner takes the same idea and makes it sharper, darker, and more masculine. This is vibrant, sensual saffron from the Emir line. Visually, this one goes into a completely different direction from Killer Oud Nights of Arabia. Instead of a heavy, red gold presentation, you get a minimalist, purple cylindrical bottle with a gold text and a black cap. It clearly borrows from the sleek Byredo style aesthetic, but with its own cool twist. The bottle looks modern and clean. It's not as luxurious as Nights of Arabia, but it still looks good for the price. And now, the scent profile here is where the things shift. Vibrant sensual saffron opens with a Chinese grapefruit, juniper berries, and saffron. The heart gives you leather and black violet, and the base has raspberry, vetiver, and cashmere. So, compared to Byredo, two things immediately stand out. First, it uses Chinese grapefruit instead of pomelo. Second, it drops the rose element from the heart. That makes a difference, because the opening is sharper, tartier, and more sour than Byredo. There's almost this unripe raspberry effect in the first few minutes, where the grapefruit, saffron, and raspberry come across a little edge. This is one of those fragrances where the first spray can lie to you. Do not judge it from the opening. Once it settles, the cashmere comes forward and gives you a warmer, smoother, more velvety dry down. I would put this around 85% close in the air after the dry down, but the opening is less faithful than Killer Oud Nights of Arabia. The biggest personality difference is that this one feels sharper and more masculine. Byredo is perfectly unisex. Maison Alhambra stays pretty unisex. Killer Oud Nights of Arabia leans a little heavier and warmer, but vibrant sensual saffron feels more tart, musky, and masculine. Performance is respectable. I get around 6 hours on skin. It projects at arm's length for the first hour, then it settles into a warm, velvety skin scent. It's not the loudest fragrance in this comparison, but it gives you enough presence for a night out. The value is strong, especially if you find it around that $30 range. Here's the verdict. If you want a sharper, more masculine, more tart interpretation of the black saffron idea, vibrant sensual saffron is worth considering. But if you want the smoothest and most accurate clone, I would put Maison Alhambra and a Killer Oud Nights of Arabia ahead of it. Now, let's move to the Musky budget option. This is a Milestone Saffron Noir. Milestone has been aggressively targeting niche style fragrances, and Saffron Noir is clearly aimed at the black saffron lane. Presentation-wise, this one fairly straightforward. You get a heavy glass bottle with a dark frame and minimalist text. It looks respectable on a shelf, but it does not feel as premium as Killer Oud Nights of Arabia. The atomizer is basic. It works, but the spray is narrower and less luxurious. The cap can also be a little annoying to take off. Now, let's get into the scent. Safran Noir opens with saffron, juniper berries, and Chinese grapefruit. The heart has leather and black violet. The base gives you raspberry, vetiver, and cashmerean. So, like vibrant, sensual saffron, this uses Chinese grapefruit instead of pomelo. And again, this matters. The opening is where this fragrance struggles the most. For the first 5 minutes, it can feel sharper, rougher, and more synthetic than Byredo. I would put the opening closer to 75% similar, but once it settles, the fragrance improves a lot. In the air, after the opening comes down, I would put it around 85% close to the original idea. The biggest difference is the dry down. Milestone uses cashmerean instead of Byredo blonde wood, so you get a warmer, muskier, denser finish. It does not have the same crisp transparency of Byredo, and that is really the theme with a lot of these clones. They can capture the dark, fruity leather idea, but they often lose the airy, expensive texture. Performance is actually very good for the price. On skin, Saffron Noir gives me around 6 to 7 hours. Projection is moderate to strong for the first hour and a half, then it moves closer to the skin. On close, that musky cashmerean base can linger much closer. This is another cool weather fragrance I would save for the evenings, jackets, and colder air. Compared to the others, this one feels a touch more masculine and synthetic, especially in the opening, but it also gives you a strong value. Here is the verdict. Milestone, Saffron Noir is not the smoothest clone, and the opening is the weakest part. But if you want budget-friendly, musky take on Byredo Black Saffron DNA with a solid performance, it does the job. Just give it 5 to 10 minutes before judging it. And now we get to the strangest fragrance in this video, Armaf Black Saffron. This is the wild card because, based on the name, you would expect this to be a direct Byredo Black Saffron clone. But once you look at Armaf's note structure, the story changes completely. This is not a strict note-for-note clone. It's more a same-name affordable alternative or a creative interpretation of a dark saffron style fragrance. And the distinction matters. Presentation-wise, Armaf does what Armaf does. It refuses to be subtle. Instead of copying Byredo minimalist Scandinavian style, the bottle goes heavier, bolder, and more Middle Eastern in presentation. It has a metallic accent and a commanding shelf presence. It's much louder visual identity. The atomizer is also aggressive. It pushes out a dense cloud which fits the style of the fragrance. Now let's talk about the scent. Armaf Black Saffron officially opens with lavender and ginger. The heart includes patchouli, vanilla, musk, and tonka beans. The base gives you amber, sandalwood, and vetiver. So let's be honest, there is no pomelo, there's no raspberry, no leather, no black violet. That means this is not recreating Byredo famous raspberry leather structure. Instead, Armaf gives you a darker, warmer, spicier, amber woody fragrance that lives in a similar scent universe. But it's not the same composition, so how close it is? As a true clone, not very close. As a dark, sweet, spicy alternative with a similar mood, I would put it around 75% close to the aura, but not 75% close to the actual structure. This is an important difference. The opening gives you bright ginger kick instead of Byredo pomelo and saffron brightness. Then the fragrance moves into patchouli, vanilla, musk, and tonka, which makes it much more sweeter and warmer. The dry down is heavy with amber, sandalwood, and vetiver. So compared to Byredo, Armaf is thicker, sweeter, woodier, more oriental, and much less transparent. But here is where Armaf wins. Performance. This is easily one of the strongest performances in the video. On skin, I get around 7 to 8 hours, and on clothes this can push well past 12 hours. Projection is big in the first few hours. This leaves a serious scent trail, so if your priority is performance, Armaf is hard to ignore. But if your priority is accuracy, this is not the winner. This is best for fall, winter evenings, and people who enjoy warm amber, patchouli, vanilla, tonka, and sandalwood. Compared to others, it leans the sweetest and possibly the most feminine unisex, while still leaving enough wood and spice to work across the board. Here is the verdict. Armaf Black Saffron is not the closest Byredo clone, but it may be the best performer and the most unique twist in this comparison. Buy this if you want power, warm sweetness, and a darker amber-style fragrance. Do not buy this expecting the photorealistic raspberry leather Byredo clone. So let's rank them clearly. If you want the closest overall clone, my pick is Maison Alhambra by Safron. It follows the same basic architecture, the closest. Citrus, saffron, leather, violet, raspberry, vetiver, and woods. It is sweeter and denser than Byredo, but for the price, it gets shockingly close. If you want the best presentation, go with Paris Corner Killer Oud Nights of Arabia. The bottle feels expensive, the atomizer is better, and the fragrance gives you a warmer, muskier, more luxurious feeling take on the DNA. If you want a sharper, more masculine version, go with Vibrant Sensual Saffron. It's a tart musky, a little rough in the opening, but very wearable once it settles. If you want the budget musky option, go with Milestone Safran Noir. The opening is not the smoothest, but the dry now gets much better and value is strong. And if you want the best performer, but you do not care about it being a true clone, go with Armaf Black Saffron. This one is a wild card. It is not the most accurate, but it is powerful, long-lasting, and very different from the rest. But if we are talking strictly about recreating Byredo, raspberry, leather, saffron, and transparent woods character, the one I would buy first is Maison Alhambra by Safron. This is the safest recommendation for someone who wants black saffron experience without paying Byredo prices. But here's a golden rule with all these affordable clones and alternatives. Do not judge them from the first spray. The opening can be sharp. They can be synthetic. They can feel rough in the first few minutes. Give them time to dry down. Because once they settle, some of these can get surprisingly close to that luxury niche feeling for the price of a takeout dinner. Now, I want to hear from you. Would you rather have the closest clone, the best performing clone, or the best looking bottle? Drop your pick in the comments, because with black saffron alternatives, those are definitely not always the same fragrance. Thank you very much for watching.